Today we're going to be looking at something pretty fascinating. At least I think so. It's this research project about how science teachers are dealing with misinformation
Yeah.
and like the whole nature of science thing in the classroom.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is. And, one of the things that really caught my eye was this term. They kept using epistemic reflexivity.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest, at first I was like, what? Epistemic? What? Like it sounded kind of intimidating.
Uh-huh.
But then the more I read, the more I realized how relevant it actually is for all of us,
Yeah.
not just teachers.
Right. Especially these days, right? Figuring out what's true. It's like, oh my gosh.
It really is. It feels like every day there's a new minefield of information out there.
Yeah.
And how are we supposed to even know where to start?
It's tough.
So yeah, I'm excited to dive into this and hopefully unpack some of this for the listener.
Yeah, sounds good.
So maybe we could start with like the basics. What is this epistemic reflexivity thing? And why should anybody care?
Sure, yeah. It is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Epistemic reflexivity. But the idea itself is actually really simple.
Okay.
It's all about understanding how we know what we know. Like, often we focus so much on the what. Like, what are the facts? What are the figures?
Right, right.
But this is more about the how we arrive at our beliefs, the things that influence our judgments.
Oh, okay. So it's
Yeah.
not just about like knowing stuff. It's about knowing how we know it.
Exactly, yeah. Think about it this way. You're way more likely to believe something if your best friend tells you than if like some rando posts this on social media, right?
Right.
That's because our relationships, our experiences, they all act as these filters. They shape what we end up believing.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, so epistemic reflexivity, it's basically about becoming aware of those filters, recognizing our own biases, our limitations, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But why is this so important for science in particular?
Well, we're living in this time when misinformation is just everywhere. And trust in institutions, like science especially, it's declining.
Yeah.
And this isn't just an abstract problem. It has real consequences for the world.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at the debates around like vaccines or climate change.
Yeah.
It's hard to even know what to trust anymore.
It is, and that's actually the very problem this research project is trying to address. It's about empowering people to become what some researchers call competent outsiders.
Oh.
Those who may not be scientists themselves,
Okay.
but who can confidently engage with scientific information and then make informed decisions.
I love that. Competent outsiders.
Yeah. They're starting by saying, maybe traditional science education, the way we've been doing things, with all the emphasis on memorizing facts and figures,
Yeah.
maybe that's not actually giving students the critical thinking skills they need today for this kind of information landscape.
So knowing the science isn't enough.
Well, it's a starting point for sure, but it's not enough in this day and age. This research is arguing we need to go deeper. We need to help students understand how science actually works.
Oh.
Many people, even those who teach science, hold inaccurate views about how science works.
Okay.
They see it as a rigid, objective pursuit of absolute truth, when in reality, scientific knowledge is constantly evolving. And that's where those misconceptions can make people vulnerable to misinformation. If you believe science should provide unwavering absolute truths,
Yeah.
then anything that challenges that view can seem like a crack in the foundation of science itself, rather than just a natural part of the process.
And that's where the proposed framework for teaching the nature of science comes in.
Yes.
I was really intrigued by the emphasis on 3 key characteristics:
Okay.
tentative, social, and pluralistic.
Right.
Can you break those down for us?
Of course. Scientific knowledge is constantly evolving, and embracing that, being okay with it, can help us to be more open-minded, less dogmatic in our thinking. It's about recognizing that science is embedded in social structures and power dynamics. For example, the history of eugenics, where scientific ideas were used to justify horrific policies
Right.
based on racist and ableist ideologies. And finally, the pluralistic nature of science emphasizes that there isn't one single scientific method
Right.
that applies to all disciplines.
So it's about recognizing the diversity of approaches and perspectives within science itself.
Right. It's also about recognizing that Western science is just one way of knowing the world, and that other knowledge systems have valuable insights to offer. Think about how our understanding of the universe has shifted.
We used to believe the Earth was the center of the universe.
Right.
It wasn't just about, new scientific observation. It was about challenging deeply held beliefs about the universe and humanity's place in it, beliefs that were intertwined with religious and philosophical ideas of the time.
That's a perfect illustration of how science is never truly value-free,
Right.
and how those values can shape the questions we ask, the research we pursue, and the interpretations we make.
And it connects back to all three key characteristics of science we discussed:
Yes,
tentative, social, and pluralistic.
it does.
It shows how scientific knowledge can change, how those changes are influenced by social and cultural factors,
Yeah.
and how different ways of knowing can coexist and clash. I like that. It makes science feel a lot more human. It's like showing them it's a process of discovery, not just some finished product,
Yeah.
and that anyone can be a part of that, not just people in lab coats.
Exactly. That's such a crucial point.
So how do you teach that kind of thinking? I mean, epistemic reflexivity still sounds really abstract.
Yeah, it's a complex concept, but the researchers think it can be broken down into like practical skills and habits, ways of thinking. Like one key element is intellectual humility.
Intellectual humility.
Yeah, like being willing to admit you might be wrong and changing your mind when new evidence comes up.
Wait, so does that mean we can never be sure about anything?
Well, no, not exactly. But it does mean recognizing that what we know is always evolving.
I see what you mean. It's like being comfortable with not knowing everything.
Right.
And being open to changing your mind when you learn new stuff.
Exactly. And that's a powerful skill to have, not just in science, but in life in general. And that's what this research project is all about.
Hmm.
If we can help students develop this epistemic reflexivity in the classroom,
Yeah.
they can become more informed, more discerning citizens
Makes
who
sense.
can critically evaluate information and make good judgments, even when there are all these conflicting claims all over the place.
Which brings us back to you, dear listener. Think about a time you saw something that made you question your beliefs, something that maybe even made you feel kind of defensive or uncomfortable. What did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Did you look into it more, or did you just want to brush it off?
This is where epistemic reflexivity can really help, It's about seeing those moments, the uncomfortable ones, as chances to grow, as like invitations to look at our own biases, ask ourselves some hard questions, and maybe come out understanding things better.
But I got to ask,
Yeah.
are there any downsides? Like, if we're always questioning everything, doesn't that make it hard to, like, actually do anything?
That's a good question. And yeah, it is possible to go too far with the skepticism, but that's where those other parts of epistemic reflexivity come in. Like, you got to be diligent.
Yeah.
Actually look for information.
Right.
You got to be discerning, figure out which sources are good and which aren't. And you got to be committed to being honest.
So it's all about balance. I think you put that really well. It's not about, like, throwing the baby out the bathwater or something. It's about being more aware of how we're taking in information and
Yeah.
how that shapes what we believe.
Oh.
It's about moving beyond
Yeah.
blind acceptance or knee-jerk skepticism
Right.
and fostering a healthy sense of curiosity and inquiry.
And a willingness to engage with diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
Even those that challenge our own views.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. So how are they actually doing this? Like, what does this research project actually look like?
Well, they're working directly with science teachers. They're going into classrooms, observing and studying how these ideas are being used in actual teaching.
Oh, cool. So they're not just like sitting in an ivory tower,
No.
theorizing about education.
Not at all.
They're actually out there in the trenches with the teachers.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're taking a very practical approach, recognizing that translating these complex ideas into like actual classroom practices can be tough.
I bet.
And that's where the real magic happens. I'm eager to see how the teachers make sense of these concepts and how their teaching practices evolve over time.
I'm sure they'll have their own aha moments along the way.
I hope so. That's the beauty of action research, right? It's a journey of discovery, not just for the researcher, but for the participants as well.
It's about embracing that messiness and complexity of real-world learning.
And recognizing the potential for transformative change.
Yeah.
Not just for the teachers involved,
Right.
but for the students they teach.
Mm.
And maybe even for the broader field of education.
Man, this has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about how we learn and how we figure out what's true. So as we wrap up, what are some key takeaways for a listener, do you think?
It's about never losing that curiosity, being okay with being wrong sometimes, and always searching for truth, even when it's tough.
That's a great way to put it. So, listener, I hope this has given you a new way of looking at and how to handle all this information coming at us.
Right.
Whether you're a student, a scientist, or just someone trying to make sense of the world, these ideas can help you become a better, more thoughtful thinker.
It's been awesome talking about this with you. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep being curious, keep your mind open, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.